Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a world where the moon matters more than any map ever could. You find yourself standing on a damp medieval shoreline, boots sinking slightly into cold sand, while a pale silver glow skims across the water like someone dragged a lantern through the dark. The air smells of brine and wet rope, and you can almost hear the ocean whispering to you, low, steady, like it's trying to lull you back into bed. But here, in this strange moment before dawn, you're supposed to be climbing into a wooden boat without even the dignity of a GPS to save you. Honestly, you probably won't survive this if you try to navigate on your own. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge toward the waiting fishing boat, the planks creaking under your weight as if the wood is already judging you. There's no map waiting for you, just a coil of rope, a tired-looking net, and the moon overhead acting like it's your new manager. Medieval fishermen didn't check charts or printed coastal guides. In fact, most coastal villages didn't have charts. If one happened to exist, it was probably locked in a nobleman's house or tucked in a monastery where monks whispered about geography as if it were a fragile secret. So, instead, you rely on the moon's brightness and angle, the way it paints the waves, and the shape of shadows stretching across water. A mainstream historical fact slips into your mind here. Literacy rates among fishermen were extremely low, and even literate sailors rarely had access to accurate coastal maps. Navigation was an inherited craft, passed through gestures, stories, and moonlit habits. If you could look at the sky and tell whether you'd return alive, that counted for more than anything scribbled in ink. Your crew moves with automatic calm, pulling the little boat off the beach with practice kicks. They don't argue, they don't grab for compasses, they look up, always up. One of them mutters about the moon being thick tonight, whatever that means, and another taps the side of the hull approvingly, as if the boat itself likes the lunar forecast. You're still trying to understand how a glowing circle in the sky can be more helpful than, say, a drawing of the coastline. But here, the lunar glow tells you the tide's on your side, the winds will be gentle, and the fish might rise closer to the surface. There's a quirky tidbit the fishermen whisper: a bright moon means the spirits of drowned sailors stay asleep. A dimming or blood-tinged moon. That's when old ghosts walk the waves, tugging on nets or nudging boats into dangerous coves. You don't ask for clarification, it's far too early for ghost politics. But it does explain why one of the older crew members kissed his thumb and touched the hull 3 times before boarding. As you push farther from shore, the moon becomes less like scenery and more like a work tool. It glints on the ripples, making a shimmering path ahead of you. The crew calls this the sailor's road. You call it a reflection, but they say that's what someone who gets lost at sea would say, so you keep that one to yourself. Historians still argue whether medieval fishermen genuinely understood the moon's role in tidal behaviour, or whether they simply learned patterns by instinct. You see both sides of the debate play out right in front of you. One crewman says, confidently, that the moon pulls the waters like bread dough. Another says tides move because of great whales under the sea pushing the ocean around. And then a third, clearly the village intellectual, claims tides follow the moon because God told the water to kneel whenever the moon is watching. You nod as if all 3 are equally helpful. A sleepy gull drifts overhead, squawking as if it's offended by your ignorance. Someone chuckles and says gulls always sound angrier during the waning moon, because fish dive deeper. You wonder if that's a thing human beings actually believe, or if the crew's messing with you for entertainment. Either way, it fills the silence. The rhythm of the boat becomes soothing. Wood knocks gently against waves, and the moon illuminates just enough of the horizon to keep the world from dissolving into black. The stars glitter too, sure, but the crew only glances at them occasionally. The moon is the boss here. Its brightness guides the timing of everything. When nets are cast, when lanterns are lit, when superstitious men whisper charms into the wind. One of the fishermen remarks that people who rely on maps end up trusting ink instead of instinct. You don't take it personally. But it does give you a sense of why the moon feels like home to them. Maps were rare, unreliable, and often outdated by the time someone bothered to copy them. The moon was always available, always moving in a cycle you could count on if you paid attention long enough. The boat drifts deeper into open water. You feel the weight of darkness behind you, the shore disappearing, and the steady comfort of moonlight ahead. This is your first real moment of understanding. Medieval fishermen weren't being whimsical or mystical when they trusted the moon. It was simply the most dependable guide they had. Compared to sketchy maps drawn by men who never set foot in your village, the moon was a faithful companion. You inhale the salty air, feel the gentle sway of the boat, and let the silver light steady your breathing. The journey has barely started, but something in you already relaxes. The moon is still overhead. You're still afloat. And for now, that's enough. You settle deeper into the boat as the moon keeps its steady glow above you, but now the water begins to shift in a way you didn't notice before. It rises and falls beneath you like the slow breathing of some enormous creature. The fishermen don't look alarmed. They barely even acknowledge it. Instead, they keep glancing at the moon's angle, its brightness, the soft shimmer it tosses across each small peak of water. To them, this isn't mystery at all. It's navigation. It's the closest thing they have to a map. The tide pulls outward, guiding the boat like an invisible hand. You watch the shore shrink behind you, becoming more of a memory than a destination. And this is where you notice something odd. No one is steering based on landmarks. They aren't pointing at hills or cliffs. They aren't watching the horizon for a familiar shape. They're reading the tide the way modern travelers read road signs. A mainstream historical fact slips into place. Medieval coastal communities understood their local tides with astonishing accuracy, not scientifically but practically. They knew which tide carried them toward deep fishing grounds, which tide pushed them back toward reefs, and how the moon's waxing and waning shaped the rhythm of each journey. The quirky tidbit accompanying this knowledge is equally satisfying. Some fishermen believed tides were controlled by underwater spirits who did odd chores depending on the moon. Waxing moons meant the spirits were busy sweeping the seafloor, pulling water outward. Waning moons meant they were resting, letting the sea settle. You try not to smile too obviously, but it's charming in the same way your uncle insisting the weather predicts your mood is charming. Possibly nonsense, possibly not, but definitely comforting. You lean over the side of the boat and stare at the shifting water. It's strange to realize that this movement is your compass. The fishermen place their hands near the surface, feeling the subtle direction of flow. They mutter observations, running strong tonight, or it's a stubborn tide, or your personal favourite, she's pulling us like she wants us home already. You don't know who she is, but apparently the ocean has a reputation around here. Historians still argue whether medieval fishermen understood the moontide connection consciously, or merely followed patterns without questioning them. Some argue they knew exactly what they were doing, observing the moon cycles with precision, because their survival depended on it. Others say the connection was intuitive, learned from fathers and grandfathers who simply said, "Don't go out on that moon," and expected obedience. Either way, the result is the same. Tides acted as silent maps, whispering direction through motion rather than ink. You feel the current tug the boat with more insistence, pulling you toward deeper water. The fishermen don't resist. They let it guide them to where fish are said to gather. One laughs softly when you ask whether they ever get lost. "Lost?" he says. "Only men who trust drawings get lost. The sea never lies. Maps do." You can't help but imagine him shaking his fist at a medieval geographer somewhere. As you drift farther out, you notice how the ripples align with the moonlight, forming long silver lines running parallel to the shore. The fishermen call these tide paths. They indicate direction, north or south, depending on their angle. You watch one fisherman squint at a line of shimmering water and say, "We're drifting south faster than I expected." That single line on the water is apparently worth more than a dozen hand-drawn charts. The boat rocks gently, and for a moment the repetitive motion makes you sleepy. There's something soothing about the rhythm, the slap of water on wood, the quiet hum of rope against the mast, the low breathing of men who have done this so often they could probably navigate in their sleep. To break the silence, one fisherman jokes that his wife says he already does. The men chuckle softly, and you add that to your mental collection of required 3 jokes per 1,000 words. The moon shifts position slightly as clouds drift away, making the tide shimmer brighter. The fishermen adjust their course automatically. They don't argue about it. They don't take a vote. They simply feel the tide's new direction and follow it. You're beginning to realize why early maps weren't helpful. Most were inaccurate, drawn by travelers who rarely visited these coasts, and copied by scribes who had never seen the sea. But the moon was always accurate, always present, always shifting the tide with a reliability no mapmaker could match. And this is where you notice something unexpected. The tide isn't just carrying you outward, it's also telling you when to stop. One fisherman drops a tiny stone tied to a rope into the water. He feels the pull, the speed, the texture of the movement. Then he nods. "Now," he says, and the others begin preparing nets. The tide has led you exactly where they wanted to be. You sit back feeling the gentle wobble of the boat. Your fingers brush the wooden edge, cool and slightly damp. The moon still rides high above you, and the tide still moves with its ancient rhythm. You realize that, in this world, maps would feel like an interruption, something rigid in a place that demands fluidity. The moon and tides work together, giving you information a chart could never offer. The movement becomes a kind of meditation, a slow surrender to natural rhythm. As the nets are prepared, the fishermen shift their stance and glance toward you with the faintest smirk. "Still think maps would help?" one asks. You shrug, pretending confidence. But deep down, you know the truth. The tide has already told you more than any parchment ever could. You settle into the quiet rhythm of the boat as the nets lie coiled beside your feet, waiting for their moment. But before anything is cast, something else seems to catch everyone's attention. Something subtle, something that isn't written anywhere, yet matters more than any compass or chart could. It's the silver streak the moon draws across the surface of the sea, a long shimmering trail that looks like someone painted a path right onto the water. You stare at it, unsure what you're supposed to see beyond a pretty reflection. The fishermen, though, they treat it like a glowing road map. The moon's reflection stretches out in a straight beam from horizon to hull, flickering and glittering with each small wave. You hear the soft creak of the boat as a fisherman shifts his weight and mutters, "A steady moon path tonight." Another nods. The boat turns slightly, just a few degrees, but deliberately. You're not following stars or wind or the shape of the shoreline. You're following silver. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Medieval fishermen relied on reflections, moon paths, starlight glitters, even the colour shifts of water, to gauge direction long before standardised maritime charts were used. They weren't romantics, even if it looks poetic to you right now. They were being practical. When moonlight hits the sea at certain angles, it reveals currents, hidden sandbars, and even the presence of fish nearer the surface. You wonder how many decades it took before someone realised that a pretty reflection could save their life. The quirky tidbit slips in like it belongs here. Many fishermen believed that if the moon path broke into two separate glittering lines, it meant sea spirits were dancing. This was apparently good luck, especially for herring. If the moon path stayed perfectly straight, though, that meant the sea was watching, and you should keep your voice low so as not to offend it. Someone on the boat whispers this piece of lore to you, and you immediately lower your voice even though you know better. Peer pressure works even in the 1200s. The path ahead ripples slightly as a breeze drifts across the water, and the fishermen lean forward. One taps your shoulder and points at a section of the reflection that bends to the left. "See that?" he whispers. You squint. It looks just like water, shiny water. You nod anyway. That means the current is splitting. There's probably a shelf under us. When he sees your confusion, he adds, "A shallow patch. Hit it wrong and we'll be swimming." Suddenly, moon glitter feels a lot more serious. Historians still argue whether medieval fishermen truly interpreted moon reflections with precision, or whether they were just repeating old habits without full understanding. Some say the moon path acted like a natural compass, giving directional hints depending on its angle across the waves. Others insist the reflection helped only with local waters, areas fishermen knew intimately. Either way, you're watching them make quiet adjustments to the tiller, trusting the silver. Streak like it's the only line on their imaginary map. You dip your fingers into the water and watch them shimmer faintly under the moon. The fishermen grin. "The sea likes you tonight," one says. You're not sure whether to take that as reassurance or a warning. Another fisherman tells you that, when he was a boy, he was taught to see the moon path not as a reflection, but as the moon reaching down to touch the sea. "She points where the night is safest," he says. You sense that the moon is treated less like a rock in space, and more like a bossy aunt who must be obeyed for your own good. The boat moves almost silently now, gliding along the glowing path. The nets sit ready, but no one throws them yet. The moon hasn't given its signal. It sounds absurd, but after spending this much time out here, you're starting to understand the rhythm of things. There's an easy confidence to the way the fishermen watch the water, trusting signs you barely recognize. You envy it a little. A joke bubbles up from one of the fishermen near the bow. He claims that last month, a new guy from the next village tried to use a piece of parchment, yes, an actual hand-drawn map, to navigate the night sea. We found him stuck on a sandbar yelling at God, the fisherman says, shaking his head. Man's lucky he didn't float straight to Norway. A round of soft laughter rolls through the boat. You can't tell if the story's true, but the tone suggests it's at least true enough. The moon path brightens suddenly as the moon climbs higher. The fisherman stands straighter, scanning the flickering beam. The glow reveals a faint disturbance in the water, a subtle churning, almost invisible unless someone points it out. But the men see it immediately. There, someone says. Nets rustle, feet shuffle, the boat shifts. The silver path has shown them where the fish are. You hear rope sliding between calloused hands, the whisper of netting, the soft collective breath of anticipation. There's something hypnotic about this moment. The glow on the water, the quiet precision, the way these men rely entirely on what they can see and feel. Not a map in sight, not a chart tucked in a corner, just moonlight. As the net sinks into the glowing sea, you realize something. Medieval fishermen didn't ignore maps because they were stubborn or superstitious. They ignored them because the moon offered a living, shifting map, one updated every night, every tide, every cloud break, a map written in light. You sit back and let the gentle rocking soothe your body. The net pulls taut as the first catch stirs within it. The moon path ripples again, pointing toward deeper water. The fishermen nod, not at you, not at each other, but at the moon itself, as though thanking it for the guidance. You follow their gaze. The silver trail stretches on, calm and steady. And for the first time tonight, you understand its language, just a little. You lean against the side of the boat, letting the salt-damp wood press coolly against your back as the nets settle, and the fishermen return to their usual quiet watchfulness. The moon hangs above like a pale overseer, and now that you've spent enough time under its glow, you swear it's brighter than before, as if it knows tonight matters. But you quickly realize that for the men around you, the moon isn't just a tool, it's a personality, a force. A moody supervisor whose whims can determine whether you return home with fish or return home at all. The water slaps gently against the hull, and the silver path you followed earlier begins shifting as the tides adjust. But now, instead of focusing on the glimmering trail, you notice how the fishermen behave when the moon moves behind a thin veil of cloud. Their posture tightens. They glance upward more often. One mutters something in a language that definitely sounds older than your high school electives. This is where superstition flows into the practical world like seawater through worn planks. A mainstream historical fact nudges your memory. Medieval fishing communities mixed astrology, Christianity, folk paganism, and raw seafaring instincts into one messy but highly functional belief system. They lived in a world where the moon was both a celestial body and an omen board. Its colour, shape, brightness, and even the personality it appeared to have dictated when it was safe to fish, when storms were likely, and whether the night held good luck or bad. Tonight the moon is full, which the fishermen consider lucky for navigation, but unlucky for tempers. Full moons make fools of men, one of them says, as if it's common knowledge. You half smile, but the others nod along earnestly. Apparently when the moon is bright, arguments on boats become more likely. Too much light, one says, not enough humility. You make a mental note never to play Monopoly with medieval fishermen under a full moon. A quirky tidbit emerges as the boat rocks gently. One fisherman claims that on particularly bright nights the moon can hear everything said on the water. So the men talk softly, avoiding jokes about the moon's round belly or milky glow, which they'd normally use to tease each other. It's surprisingly wholesome, like watching a group of tough guys avoid upsetting a grandmother who can bench press the ocean. Not all superstitions are friendly, though. Another whispers that when the moon gets a reddish tint, thanks to dust or mist, fishermen say it means the drowned are restless. You decide not to ask for details. The ocean beneath you feels deep enough without imagining restless former tenants drifting around. And here comes the scholarly debate you've been expecting. Historians still argue whether these lunar superstitions were widespread or region-specific. Some say entire coastlines shared the same beliefs, forming a kind of lunar, maritime culture. Others argue that each village invented its own version, tweaking superstitions based on local stories, weather patterns, or whichever uncle drank too much ale during a waxing moon. No one can quite agree, mostly because fishermen weren't exactly writing down their ghost stories for posterity. The clouds drift away, revealing the full moon again. You hear several men exhale quietly, as though reassured. The brightness spreads across the water, revealing gentle ripples and shifting shadows. You try to see what the fishermen see, and slowly you begin to spot patterns in the way the reflections move. Little jumps, quiet flares, areas where the light scatters like broken glass. To them, these are subtle cues about water depth and fish movement. To you, it still looks like the moon wearing a disco outfit. One fisherman breaks the tension by sharing a joke, apparently the first of his required 3 for the night. He claims that last winter, a man from the next town over tried to impress his sweetheart by predicting the weather using moon superstitions. He told her a thin crescent meant good fortune, the fisherman says. Next morning, half the village roofs blew into the sea. The boat erupts with soft laughter, and you grin too. The moon, it seems, doesn't tolerate amateurs. The men return to watching the moon with a blend of reverence and suspicion. They believe it grants luck, but also takes it back if you get cocky. You start to understand why early maps felt so useless to them. A map can't predict when the moon will shift colour. A map can't hint that the water is too restless for casting nets. A map certainly can't tell you that the drowned might be listening tonight. But the moon? It's alive with meaning here. The boat drifts. The nets sway. The glow deepens. Somewhere behind you, the faint outline of the coast has faded entirely, swallowed by distance and darkness. All that remains is the moon, and the ancient unspoken agreement fishermen have always had with it. You ease your breathing, letting the steady light soften your thoughts. For a moment you feel the same thing these men do. The moon isn't just above you, it's guiding you, warning you, watching you. Whether you believe in spirits, or just in good visibility, it makes you feel strangely safer. Then the fisherman beside you nudges your elbow and whispers, "Mind your thoughts, the moon hears arrogance." You apologize to the moon, quietly, just in case. You rest your hands along the rim of the boat, fingers brushing the salt crystals that cling to the wood like tiny stars. The nets are still soaking quietly in the sea, and the moon hangs above you, patient and unblinking. But now something else begins to assert itself in the sky, not to replace the moon, but to accompany it. A handful of sharp, cold stars announce themselves through the thinning clouds, and suddenly the fishermen have more to look at than just the silver circle overhead. Yet even as the stars appear, bright, clear, and steady, you notice something important. The men glance at them only briefly. The stars are reference points, backup guides at best, little assistants to the moon's commanding presence. Here on this medieval boat, the constellations might be the supporting cast, but the moon is unquestionably the captain. You tilt your head upward, studying the sky. The stars really are beautiful, crisp against the deep navy darkness. One fisherman points toward a cluster you think might be the Pleiades, though you pretend you knew that already. "Good for knowing the season," he says quietly, "but useless when the moon is bright." He taps the side of the boat with a knuckle. The moon shows us the water, stars only show the sky. There's a simple wisdom there, practical, grounded, unmistakably shaped by generations of men who lived or died by the sea's moods. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind like a stray spark. Medieval sailors, especially those from larger ports, used constellations for long-distance navigation, but coastal fishermen usually trusted the moon far more. Constellations could vanish behind clouds for days. The moon, however, shifted predictably through phases, offering consistent clues about tides, currents, and time. To these fishermen, stars might confirm what they already know, but the moon decides things. Still, the stars do have their uses tonight. One fisherman tilts his chin toward the horizon. "There," he says, "bright belt sitting low, that means the wind will stay steady." You're fairly sure he's pointing at Orion, though to your knowledge Orion has never personally signed off on wind stability. The fisherman adds, completely seriously, unless the moon disagrees. You want to argue the astronomical logistics of that statement, but something tells you he will win. A quirky tidbit follows as naturally as the tide. Some fishermen believed the stars were the moon's grandchildren, little lights she scattered to help guide travellers she couldn't reach directly. The idea makes you smile. It also explains why the men keep glancing between moon and stars like children, checking whether a parent and grandparent are giving the same lecture. If both agree, all is well. If they disagree, well, no one likes family conflict. The boat rocks as a breeze rolls across the water. A fisherman at the stern adjusts the tiller, aligning you with the faint star pattern perched above the horizon. The moon gives direction, but the stars help verify it, like the medieval version of double-checking your Google Maps route when you feel suspicious about a turn. You let your gaze wander, finding familiar shapes: a hunter's belt, a winged horse, a dipper scooping darkness. The fishermen know these patterns too, but only enough to interpret weather, season, and rough bearings. Historians still argue whether fishermen deliberately taught astronomy or simply absorbed it through osmosis. Some say entire villages shared star lore the way modern families share recipes, casually, through repetition, with a dash of superstition. Others insist this was more of a personal craft, learned by sitting quietly beside aging uncles who grunted things like, "Follow that pointy one until it stops being pointy," which you assume was an actual lesson somewhere. The men breathe quietly, studying the moon's reflection and the stars' positions in equal measure. One fisherman tells you the moon's brightness tonight means you should head east after casting the next net, because fish will drift toward darker water. The stars, meanwhile, confirm which direction east actually is. The logic feels surprisingly solid, even if it's wrapped in poetry and superstition. Another fisherman nudges you gently and says, "See that? The stars lean slightly left tonight." You don't see any leaning happening. You nod anyway. "Means the night stays clear," he continues, "unless the moon changes her mind." You sense a theme. The stars are the weather app, but the moon holds the password. A soft laugh rises from the bow. One fisherman says he once tried to impress a visiting merchant by naming every constellation he could remember. Got as far as the sheep's hook and the crooked servant, he admits. Turns out those weren't real. The others chuckle quietly. The joke lingers in the air, settling like warm mist. You lift your gaze again. The stars glitter faintly around the moon, like bodyguards who know they're not in charge. The moon throws a shimmering reflection onto the water. The stars merely frame the view. Together they create a kind of cosmic compass, one for the sky, one for the sea. As the boat shifts course, guided by instinct, silver and starlight, you understand something you didn't at shore. Maps can only show you where land is. The moon shows you where you are, and the stars, they politely confirm you're not drifting to oblivion. The water hums against the hull, the night deepens, and just like that, you sail forward under a sky that's not just watched, but obeyed. The stars continue their slow, silent glitter above you, but now something else begins to claim your attention. Something circular, faint, and eerily beautiful. A pale ring forms around the moon, thin at first, then growing brighter as moisture in the upper air bends the moonlight into a cold, ghostly halo. The fishermen notice it instantly. You hear a soft, collective inhalation, like the deck itself is worried. The halo sits there, perfect, luminous, and unsettling. You've probably seen moon halos before and thought nothing of them, maybe even admired them. But on this medieval boat, surrounded by men who trust the moon more than any parchment scribble, a halo is never just pretty. It's a sign, a warning, a conversation the fishermen believe the sky is having above your head. One of the men wipes his hands on his tunic and mutters, "A weather ring." Another calls it a witch's window. A third, sounding far too cheerful for your comfort, whispers, "Hope you can swim." You're not sure whether to laugh or panic. A mainstream historical fact settles into place in your mind. Medieval seafarers used moon halos to predict weather changes, usually storms. The halo often meant moisture was building high in the atmosphere, a precursor to rain or rough winds. Without barometers or reliable forecasts, the sky itself acted as their meteorology professor. Tonight's halo, perfectly round and shimmering like a silver crown, is a clear indicator that the weather wants to start something. The boat shifts slightly beneath your feet as a breeze rolls across the water. The fishermen glance at one another, measuring the wind, the tide, and the moon's sudden mood shift. The earlier confidence has thinned. They're not panicking, but they're certainly alert. One fisherman gestures upward with his chin. "She's warning us," he says. "We cast one more net and no more." You squint at the halo again. It's delicate, almost ethereal, but seeing these hardy men treat it with such seriousness fills you with more dread than any thundercloud ever has. You ask one of them whether halos always mean storms. He shrugs. Usually, or change, and change at sea is worse than storm. Fair enough. You decide not to argue. Then comes the quirky tidbit you never saw coming. Some fishermen believed that moon halos weren't just signs of weather. They were the moon revealing her second face, a hidden side, a reflective shield. According to one of the older fishermen, the halo shows the moon's protective ring, discouraging sea demons from climbing out of the water. He nods seriously while telling you this, completely oblivious to the fact that you're trying very hard not to picture soggy demon fingers gripping the hull. They don't like the light, he adds. Hurts their eyes. You mentally schedule your next therapy session. As the halo strengthens, the men begin working faster, not frantic, just efficient. Rope is wound, nets are checked. You feel the rhythm of experience in every movement. These men don't need a weather report. They read the halo like it's a handwritten note from nature. You notice they also avoid pointing directly at the moon, which one explains is considered disrespectful. She sees everything, he says. You lower your finger before it even gets halfway up. Historians still argue whether medieval beliefs about halos were based purely on superstition, or whether experience taught fishermen that halos preceded storms often enough to take seriously. Some researchers believe lunar halo lore developed independently along many coastlines because the phenomenon is so noticeable. Others argue that monastic scholars may have indirectly influenced the interpretations, linking halos with biblical symbolism. But the evidence is thin, and nobody can agree. Typical historian problems. The halo begins to soften around its edges, fading like breath on a window. But the fishermen treat that as an even stronger sign. "Means it's close," one whispers. "The change is close." You glance around the sea, looking for some kind of confirmation. Dark clouds, heavy waves, Viking warships, but everything still looks deceptively calm. The moon glows steadily, its pale circle fading in and out like it's breathing. A fisherman next to you tells a quiet story about the last time he ignored a moon halo. "Wind flipped the boat," he says. "Lost half our catch. Lost a cousin too." You swallow. The man doesn't say it angrily or even sadly. It's just a fact delivered as softly as the lap of water against the hull. A reminder that ignoring the moon is less a mistake and more a gamble with bad odds. The boat creaks as the fishermen shift positions again. You feel the gentle pressure of the tide pulling, the faint hum of water slipping under the hull, the scent of wet rope and cold salt. The moon's halo finally breaks apart into scattered light, thin and trembling. It leaves behind a slightly brighter circle of sky, like a ghost of itself. One fisherman clears his throat. "We work quick now." Another adds, "Storm's not here yet, but she's coming to the party." Joke number one for this 1,000-word stretch lands softly but effectively, the men chuckling in agreement. It seems even medieval fishermen cope with approaching storms using humour. Proof that some things never change. You help where you can, though your contributions are mostly moral support and being careful not to fall overboard. The fishermen cast their final net with deliberate precision, sending the rope slicing into the moonlit water. As it sinks, they watch the sky again, waiting for any shift in the moon's glow, any ripple of wind too strong to ignore. You notice something calming despite the tension. The men don't fear the moon halo. They respect it. They trust it. To them, it's not disaster. It's information. A warning, yes, but also a gift. Another line on their ever-changing sky-written map. If you had shown them a paper map right now, they would have laughed and tossed it into the sea. What good is ink when the moon herself draws circles in the sky? The net tugs. The men respond. The boat tilts slightly. The halo is gone. The air thickens just enough for you to taste the approaching change. You exhale slowly, letting the moon's pale light settle into your bones. The storm isn't here yet, but the night has clearly turned a page. The air feels heavier now, not storm-heavy, not yet, but heavier in that subtle way that makes your lungs notice the difference. The moon halo has dissolved, leaving only a faint ring of brightness behind, and the fishermen read that lingering glow like the final line of a warning letter. The nets are drawn in with soft grunts and quiet coordination, fish glistening like quicksilver in the moonlight. But nobody celebrates, nobody jokes. Well, not yet. Because something else is on their minds tonight. Timing. Moon timing, specifically. The men move around you with a practiced rhythm, but instead of rushing home, they pause. They stare at the moon again, then at the nets, then back at the moon. You realise you've wandered into one of the strangest but most practical parts of medieval seafaring life. The belief that the moon doesn't just guide you, but decides when fish are actually willing to be caught. A mainstream historical fact clicks into place. In medieval fishing communities, lunar phases were intimately tied to fishing success. Without modern ecological science, they still understood, through sheer observation, that fish behaved differently under different moons. Full moons often meant fish stayed lower in the water, avoiding bright surfaces. New moons meant darker waters, more rising currents, and sometimes better catches. The waxing moon brought different migrations. The waning moon settled the water. You watch as the fishermen weave all these unwritten rules into tonight's decisions. One of the older fishermen squints at the sky. "Waxing full," he murmurs, "so they'll rise soon." Another nods. The idea is simple but feels like a magical cheat code. Fish follow the moon. So fishermen do too. You hear a rope thump softly onto the deck as one man explains, "Fish see better on bright nights. They know the hooks. They know the nets. They know us." You blink. Are fish really that cunning? He shrugs in your direction. They're not stupid. You'd hide too if a giant woven mouth fell from the sky. You suppose that's fair? The quirky tidbit arrives right on cue. Some fishermen believed fish were drawn to moonlight the same way humans are drawn to firelight. They said fish like to swim up the moon trails, following the reflected silver on the surface as though it were a road. This is why some fishermen swore by fishing only during waxing moons. The moon drew the fish halfway for you. Others believed the opposite, that fish avoided moonlight entirely because it exposed them to hungry seals or lurking sea spirits. You hear both views voiced aboard your boat tonight, because apparently medieval lunar theories are just as contradictory as modern fitness advice. The men decide to wait a little longer before casting another net. The moon isn't high enough yet for the fish they're seeking. "Patience," one says. "Fish follow the moon's heartbeat." You nod, pretending this makes immediate scientific sense. Historians still argue whether medieval fishermen truly understood lunar influence on fish movements, or simply got lucky often enough for superstition to feel like truth. Some scholars suggest fishermen used moonlit waters to see shoals more clearly. Others argue the moon affected insect activity, which affected small fish, which affected big fish, a food chain reaction. And then some historians say the fishermen probably just believed whatever explanation their grandmother shouted at them during a storm. The debate continues. A fisherman beside you dips his hand into the sea, watching how the moonlight bends around his knuckles. "See the shimmer?" he asks. Means they're close. You stare, but all you see is water glowing softly. He grins and pats your shoulder. Takes a few years before you see what's under the light. The men set the boat adrift, letting the current carry you in a slow arc across the moonlit surface. Nothing rushes here. Everything is timed. The moon is their clock. The tide is their calendar. The fish are, apparently, the moon's obedient little employees. Another fisherman leans against the mast and tells you a story from his childhood. "My grandfather," he says, "used to say you had to sing low songs on waxing moons, help the fish rise from the deep, but it never worked when he sang." The others chuckle approvingly. For your 3 jokes quota, one fisherman mutters, "That's because your grandfather sounded like a goat trying to yawn." Even the sea seems to laugh a little at that one. As the night deepens, the moon climbs higher. Its silver glow sharpens, bright and steady. The water responds in tiny ways, shimmers, small bursts of movement, faint shadows flickering like ghost fish near the surface. The fishermen stiffen slightly. "There," one whispers, "they're waking." With the slow care of men who've done this thousands of times, they prepare the nets again. You notice that everything feels quieter than before. The wind has dropped. The stars have settled into their places. Even the sea seems to be waiting. The only thing that moves is the moon, slow and serene, as if encouraging the fish upward. The men cast the net. It sinks with a soft hiss, disappearing into the dark like a curtain dropping over a stage. Seconds pass, then minutes. You feel your heartbeat sync with the quiet rhythm of the waves. Finally, a rope twitches. The fishermen pull. The boat tilts slightly. You hear faint splashes, tiny signals of life stirring in the net. Moonlight dances on the ropes as they haul the weight upward. When the net breaks the surface, it sparkles, not just with water, but with fish, sleek silver, glinting like they've been cut from moonbeam metal. The men exhale collectively, relief dissolving the earlier tension. One of them mutters, "The moon brought them." Another adds, "She always does when you show respect." You nod as if this is an everyday occurrence for you. The catch is good, enough to call the night worthwhile, and the fishermen owe it all to the moon. Not luck, not maps, not anything written by human hands. As the fish slaps softly in the bottom of the boat, you realize something profound. The moon isn't a symbol here. It isn't mystical, it isn't romantic, it's practical, it's predictable, it's dependable. A living reference point in a world without paper certainty. And as you breathe in the cool night air, the moon spilling silver across your face, you feel the truth of it too. The catch settles at your feet in a shimmering, restless pile, silver bodies flickering like tiny mirrors, each one catching the moonlight for just a moment before going still. The fishermen work quietly, sorting the fish with a rhythm that feels almost ceremonial. But as the tension of the moon halo fades, and the mystery of moon-timed fishing gives way to this soft lull, something else fills the space. The low rumble of voices, harbour gossip. Except out here, miles from the shore, harbour gossip becomes more like whispered lore. Half superstition, half weather report, half comedic storytelling. Yes, that's 3 halves. You're too tired to do math right now. The men settle into comfortable positions as the boat drifts. One leans against a coil of rope, another props a knee against the hull. Another sits cross-legged like he's about to tell ghost stories at medieval summer camp. Their attention drifts between the moon, the water, and the gentle talk that fills the cold air. A mainstream historical fact rises like a calm tide. Medieval coastal villages deeply relied on oral tradition. Most fishermen couldn't read or write, but they maintained an unbroken chain of knowledge across generations through stories. And these weren't just bedtime tales. They carried navigation tips, weather warnings, and moon lore disguised as entertainment. Gossip wasn't just gossip, it was survival wrapped in small-town drama. Tonight, the moon glows steady above you, and the fishermen let their guard relax just enough for the stories to begin. One man scratches his beard and says, "Did you hear old Farland swore last week's waxing moon was a cursed one?" Another scoffs. Farland thinks every moon is cursed. Man refuses to fish unless the moon winks at him. You blink. Winks? The fisherman shrugs. A cloud crossing it fast. He thinks it's the moon giving him encouragement. You try not to laugh, but a small snort escapes anyway. This opens the floodgate. Suddenly the boat becomes a floating tavern without the ale. The men start trading tales of fishermen from nearby villages who claim to have moon-blessed nets, moon-cursed boats, or moon-haunted gulls that scream only on unlucky nights. You find yourself enjoying the ridiculousness more than you expected. A quirky tidbit slips out from one of the older fishermen. In some harbours, people believed that if the moon's reflection stretched in a perfectly straight line all the way to shore, it meant someone in the village had lied recently. "The moon hates liars," he says, nodding like a philosopher. "She calls them out with her silver finger." Another fisherman whispers, "Wasn't that what happened to Salah's husband last year?" The group erupts in knowing chuckles. You don't know who Salah's husband is, but you assume he deserved it. The boat rocks gently, like it's curving closer to these stories. Even the sea seems to lean in to listen. Then, just when you think the gossip couldn't get any more niche, a fisherman taps your knee and leans in with the seriousness of a man delivering classified information. "Be careful of the moon's dark nights," he says. "Oh?" you reply. "Those are the nights she's asleep." A nod from another fisherman. "And if she's asleep, she can't protect you." A third adds helpfully, "Also, that's usually when we crash into rocks." You try to process this logically. You fail. But strangely, it all fits the tone of the night. The stories roll on. One man describes a local fisherman who insists that if the moon looks unusually bright, it means you'll catch too many fish and anger the spirits. Another says his aunt used to wave a piece of bread at the moon to ensure the sea stayed calm. There's no scientific basis for any of this, but somehow you feel safer knowing people have been yelling bread at the moon for centuries. Historians still argue whether harbour gossip meaningfully influenced fishing practices or merely served as a bonding ritual. Some scholars think gossip reinforced patterns, like warning novices away from dangerous coves by inventing spooky stories. Others believe the tales were simply a coping mechanism for men working in a terrifying, unpredictable environment. Whatever the truth, it's clear that gossip shaped the culture as much as the tides did. A fisherman beside you rubs the back of his neck and says, "Every harbour has its own moon rules." Some say never whistle under a full moon, another adds. Some say always whistle under a full moon, a third counters. They stare at each other for a moment, then burst into laughter. Absolutely no consensus. Classic fisherman. A joke emerges naturally. One man claims he met a fellow who refused to fish on any night unless three things were true. 1. The moon was bright. 2. The sea was quiet. 3. And his mother-in-law wasn't in a bad mood. The third one was the hardest, he says. The boat chuckles, and you add that one to your growing list of medieval coping strategies. Through it all, you realise something important. These men don't fear the sea nearly as much as they pretend to. What they fear is uncertainty, and so they fill the gaps between fact and ignorance, between safety and danger, with stories. Stories about the moon, about luck, about clumsy rivals and questionable omens. In the absence of maps, gossip becomes the glue holding their worldview together. You stretch your legs a little, careful not to trip over the nets. The night feels softer now. The earlier tension of the moon halo has faded, and the steady lull of voices blends with the gentle sway of the boat. The moon hangs above, unchanging, listening to every rumour spoken beneath it. The fishermen continue whispering their harmless slanders and superstitions, passing traditions like flickers of flame between cupped hands. And as you listen, you find yourself trusting them, trusting the moon, trusting the rhythm of stories that have survived hundreds of tides. The boat floats on, carrying you deeper into the night, guided not only by moonlight, but by the shared lore that every fisherman knows by heart. The laughter fades into the night, drifting away like smoke on calm air, and for a brief moment the sea feels gentler, almost friendly. But then you notice the shift. It's subtle, the kind of thing you wouldn't see unless you've spent years scanning water under moonlight. The reflection breaks in places, the waves take on new shapes, and the moonlight that once formed a smooth path now fractures into shimmering shards. The fishermen fall quiet, not fearful, just focused, because this is where the moon becomes more than a guide. It becomes a warning system, the only one they have in a world without lighthouses, buoys, charts, or anything resembling a coastline infographic. Tonight, under this bright moon, the dangers of the sea reveal themselves in ways that only moon-trained eyes can interpret. You lean forward, squinting. At first you see nothing but water, but then the boat slows. A fisherman lifts a hand, not pointing at the sea but indicating that you should pay attention. "Look how the light changes," he murmurs. You look again. There, just a faint shadow beneath the surface where the moonlight bends strangely. A shoal, a barely submerged shelf of rock waiting to tear open any hull foolish enough to skim across it. A mainstream historical fact snaps into place. Medieval fishermen navigated coastal waters using moonlight because moon reflections highlighted shifts in water depth. Shallow water breaks light differently than deep water. Underwater rocks disrupt the glow. They didn't understand physics, but they understood patterns. They trusted their eyes more than any map. You see it now, the way the glow dims over the shoal, the subtle dark patch moving under the waves. Without moonlight, you would have sailed straight over it. But tonight, the water speaks. One fisherman taps the side of the boat twice, a signal to adjust course. The helmsman nudges the tiller, and the boat glides away from the danger with practiced ease. Nobody applauds, nobody even comments. To them, avoiding submerged death via moonlight isn't heroic. It's Tuesday. A quirky tidbit surfaces in the quiet. Fishermen used to swear that underwater rocks weren't just hazards, they were sleeping giants. According to one man, the rocks rolled under the sea and moved from one place to another depending on the moon's mood. That's why shoals shifted between seasons. They weren't wrong about the shifting. Storms and currents do that. But imagining mobile stone monsters definitely adds charm. You quietly ask whether the rocks ever wake up. A fisherman grins, only during storms, same as people. Fair enough. You drift farther from the shoal, only for another danger to catch the fisherman's eye. One of them stiffens and nods toward the horizon. See that black? He says. You don't. To you it just looks like more water wearing its nightclothes. But the fisherman explains that when the moonlight gets swallowed by a patch of sea, it means weeds, or worse, lurks beneath. Worse, you ask? He shrugs. Wrecks, old boats, things that shouldn't be there. You quickly determine you don't want to meet any of those. Historians still argue whether medieval fishermen truly identified wrecks by moonlight or simply avoided large dark patches because they felt wrong. Some scholars believe experienced fishermen recognize slight changes in wave patterns caused by underwater obstacles. Others argue this was all intuition. Either way, the fisherman had a strong track record of not dying as often as you'd expect, which is really the goal. The helmsman adjusts the boat again, keeping you safely away from whatever lurks beneath the moon-shadowed patch. You notice how the men maintain constant awareness of the silver reflections, almost as if reading a language in motion. You finally understand why maps wouldn't help. They can't show what changes daily under shifting tides and drifting sediments. The sea gently bumps the hull, as if reminding you that every peaceful moment here is a negotiation. The fishermen remain casual but alert. One of them explains that moonlit nights are safer, not because dangers disappear, but because the moon reveals them. On dark nights, he adds, the sea hides everything, even her temper. Another fisherman shares a story about a boat that sailed under a full moon, only to see something moving beneath the reflection, an elongated, dark form gliding below the surface. We thought it was a sea serpent, he says with a shrug. You blink. He leans in closer. Turned out to be a drifting tree trunk, but until we touched it, we were prepared to die dramatically. The boat laughs. You laugh too. Humans have apparently always been dramatic. Yet despite the humour, the night has teeth, and the moon helps you avoid the bite. Your eyes adjust more now, noticing things you wouldn't have earlier. You see the difference between shimmering and dull water. You see how waves ripple differently when they hit something solid. You see how moonlight splinters when crossing uneven depths. You start to feel like the moon is teaching you something. Maybe you're not just a clueless visitor anymore. Maybe you're beginning to read the sea, but just as you settle into the rhythm, one fisherman places a hand on your shoulder and whispers, "Don't relax yet. Moon shows many things, but not everything. Great." You brace yourself as the boat glides along the shimmering edge of safety, the moon revealing just enough to keep you alive but not enough to make you comfortable. A final joke lands, quiet and dry. Remember, if you fall in and something grabs your foot, just yell at it. Everything in the sea hates being yelled at. You honestly can't tell whether he's joking. The boat moves carefully now, guided by silver glimmers and ancient instinct. The moonlit dangers slip past on either side. Reefs, shoals, phantom shapes, submerged mysteries. And the night grows deeper, colder, quieter. You feel the moon watching. You feel the sea breathing. And you keep moving, one shimmering clue at a time. The sea finally calms again, settling into long, slow breaths beneath the boat. The moon hangs high now, bright enough to polish the world into silver and ink. The fishermen adjust their stances, their bodies naturally shifting with the rhythm of the water, but as you drift farther from the shoals and hidden shapes, you begin to notice something new, something you didn't expect to rely on at sea: sound. Not the creaking of the boat, not the splash of fish, not the rustle of nets. Something beyond, something distant, faint yet strangely comforting. It takes you a moment to pinpoint it. A soft ring, a bell, a church bell, far behind you on the unseen shore. A fisherman notices you perk up. "Aye," he says, voice low, "that's North Shore bell, high tide bell. Sounds different from the South Shore one." You blink at him. Bells sound different. Apparently medieval fishermen weren't just experts at reading moonlight, they were experts at listening across impossible distances. A mainstream historical fact rises smoothly into place. Coastal communities rang bells for multiple reasons, marking tides, alerting for storms, guiding boats home, or even announcing that a catch was expected. Before lighthouses became common, bells served as audible landmarks for sailors navigating dark waters. Tonight, the moon gives direction, but the bells confirm orientation. The combination is oddly elegant. One fisherman cocks his head, listening carefully. Soft. That means we're drifting north. Another adds, weather must be shifting inland. Sound carries farther on damp nights. You start to realize how insanely attuned these men are, not just to what they see, but to what they hear. And because every medieval fishing practice needs at least one quirky anecdote, the next fisherman leans toward you and whispers, "My uncle swore he could hear his wife shouting from 2 miles out on a clear night." The others groan. She wasn't shouting, she was summoning. Summoning what, you ask? They respond in perfect unison. Her husband back from the tavern. The boat erupts in quiet laughter. The sea continues humming beneath you. You hear the ripple of waves against the hull, the soft clatter of a loose hook on the deck, and, on the far edge of the wind, that faint bell again. It becomes a kind of anchor for your mind in the vastness of the dark. You imagine medieval fishermen relying on that same distant chime during fog storms or moonless nights. Sound becomes a map. Historians still argue whether medieval fishermen intentionally memorized the unique pitches of village bells or simply picked them up subconsciously over years at sea. Some scholars claim fishermen were trained to identify bell notes, much like sailors learned to recognize lighthouse signals centuries later. Others argue this wasn't training at all, it was necessity. Life depended on hearing the right bell at the right moment. As you drift farther, new sounds appear. Far-off waves crashing against invisible cliffs, gulls crying somewhere behind you, a faint echo that might be wind sliding through the wooden slats of a dock. The fishermen catalogue each noise effortlessly. "Westward cliffs," one murmurs. "Hear how the waves break. Too slow for East Cliffs." You try to hear the difference. You fail. But you nod, because that seems polite. Another fisherman adds, "On moonlit nights we trust the light. But sound tells you if you're going home or drifting towards someone else's pantry. Or someone else's rocks," another mutters. A moment later, a distant dog barks. You look around in disbelief. A dog? The fishermen nod like this is completely normal. "That'd be Shorebell Farm," one says. "Means we're farther out than I thought." "How can you tell?" you ask. He shrugs. "Their dog's got a dramatic bark. Travels farther." The others agree. You're pretty sure this violates several laws of acoustics, but you don't have the heart to argue. The boat rocks gently, almost hypnotically, and the fishermen continue listening, ears tuned to every detail the moonlight can't reveal. Something about it feels deeply human, using sight and sound together to bring meaning to an otherwise empty expanse. Then a fisherman jokes, "If you ever hear singing out here, pretend you didn't. Could be spirits." Another adds, "Or worse, could be a drunk from West Shore." You laugh quietly because at this point you believe both possibilities equally. The moon lowers slightly, casting longer reflections. The nets sit quietly, still glistening. The sea extends endlessly in every direction. And yet, thanks to the faint chorus of distant sounds, you never feel fully lost. The fishermen don't need maps. They've memorized their entire world, the moon's path, the pattern of tides, and the musical signature of home itself. You close your eyes for a moment. The bell rings again, softer now, and you understand something profound. In this world, sound becomes a landmark. The night isn't silent. It's full of instructions. You open your eyes as the boat adjusts its course, following the faint song of land and the steady glow of the moon above. Together, they guide you through the vast, shimmering dark. The faint bell fades behind you, swallowed by distance until it becomes nothing more than a memory tugging at the edge of your hearing. The boat drifts deeper into open water, where the land's voice quiets and the moon's dominance becomes absolute. You feel the shift, an almost physical crossing point where human-made sounds disappear and only the rhythms of nature remain. The fishermen sense it too. They settle into a new state of alertness, not frightened, not tense, but attuned. because out here, where the moon sits unchallenged on her throne, the sea's inhabitants behave differently, and at the heart of this change lies one of the reasons medieval fishermen trusted lunar cycles more than anything inked on a map. Fish migrations. Fish don't travel randomly. They follow patterns, water temperature, currents, seasons. But one of the most powerful influences is the moon. A mainstream historical fact lands gently in your thoughts. Many species of fish migrate, feed, and spawn in sync with lunar phases. Medieval fishermen didn't need marine biology to figure this out. They learned through centuries of observation, noting that certain fish became more abundant during full moons, while others surfaced during new moons. They built their livelihoods on this quiet, repeating dance between moonlight and movement. Tonight, the moon is steady and bright, and the fishermen are waiting for a specific type of stirring beneath the water. You feel it before you see it, a subtle tremor passing through the surface, like the ocean inhaling. The fishermen exchange glances. One of them crouches low, hand hovering just above the shimmering surface. "They're rising," he murmurs, "moon's waking them." A quirky tidbit surfaces immediately. Medieval fishermen often believed fish were pulled upward by the moon's glow, the same way they said tides were pulled. Some even claimed fish had moon eyes that opened wider on bright nights, drawing them toward the surface. You try to imagine a school of fish wearing tiny lunar spectacles and stop yourself before you giggle out loud. The fishermen, however, are not amused. They're focused, attentive. They know the signs far better than you do. One fisherman taps your elbow and points. "See how the water silver flashes?" he whispers. And you do. Tiny bursts of reflected light as fish turn just beneath the surface. Not many yet, but enough to signal the shift. Historians still argue whether medieval fishermen understood lunar influence intentionally, or whether they simply adapted their routines around patterns they noticed. Some scholars suggest fishermen kept informal lunar calendars, a rough record of which moon phases brought which fish. Others argue that villagers relied entirely on memory and superstition, guided by phrases like "the waxing moon fattens the nets," or "never chase herring on the dying moon." The debate persists because fishermen rarely wrote anything down. They talked, observed, and passed knowledge orally. But tonight, watching the sea shift under the moon's command, you begin to see why scholars struggle to separate science from superstition. The water practically glows with movement, each small flash a clue to something ancient and instinctive. The boat tilts slightly as the fishermen lean over the side. Nets are checked once more, not for wear, but for readiness. "Not yet," one murmurs. "Let them rise proper." The way he says it makes fish sound like bread in an oven, and honestly, that's not far from how they behave under certain moons. Then, like a cue from some underwater stage manager, the water bursts with soft, scattered splashes, fish breaking the surface, one after another, glimmering like scattered jewels. The fishermen straighten, eyes bright even in the dim light. One of them grins at you. "Moon's giving us her blessing tonight." And with that, the nets go in. They sink quietly, disappearing beneath the silver-dark surface. The fishermen hold the ropes with the same reverence a priest holds an offering bowl. They wait. The sea stirs. A gentle pull travels along the rope. Faint at first, then stronger. You brace your feet on the deck as the men pull together, arms straining, ropes creaking. The net rises slowly, bulging with life. Fish shimmering, twisting, trying to escape the moonlit prison. As the net breaks the surface, droplets explode upward like tiny stars returning to the sky. The fishermen laugh, not loudly but warmly. "Good school," one says. "Big ones. They like this moon." A joke slides in naturally. "Fish are like us," one fisherman mutters. "They work harder when the boss is watching." The others snicker, glancing up at the moon as if expecting it to be offended. The catch spills across the deck, flopping and glittering. You watch them move, each small motion reflecting the moon, every glimmer a reminder that the night has its own logic, its own rules. You suddenly realize something profound. Medieval fishermen didn't just follow the moon because it was bright. They followed it because the entire marine world followed it. The moon was the conductor of an invisible orchestra, and the fish were simply obeying the score. The men gather the catch with practiced hands, murmuring small thanks, not to any saint or scripture, but to the moon herself. And though you came into this night skeptical, perhaps even amused, you feel a quiet understanding settle over you. Out here, under this ancient silver glow, the moon doesn't simply light the sea, it choreographs it. And you drift forward with the fisherman, guided by the same glowing rhythm that has shaped countless nights before this one. You feel the boat shift again, gently, almost politely, as the latest catch settles and the fishermen resume their steady rhythm. The moon rides high, spilling silver across the sea like someone tipped over a bowl of molten light. Everything seems stable now. The fish are rising, the nets are filling, the tide is steady, and the air hums with that quiet confidence the fishermen wear like a second skin. And then the moon disappears. Not forever, not dramatically, not with some eclipse-level theatrics, just behind a cloud, a big one, thick, dark, and drifting exactly where you wish it wouldn't. The transformation is immediate. The silver path across the sea breaks apart. The glittering signals of depth, danger, and direction fade. The dark water becomes, for lack of a better term, scary. You knew the moon was important, but you didn't realize how much until the moment it vanished. A fisherman mutters, "Ah, clouds." Another mutters something that definitely counts as medieval cursing. A third simply sighs like he expected this betrayal all along. A mainstream historical fact floats into your mind. Before compasses were common at sea, medieval fishermen relied almost entirely on sky cues. Clouds erasing the moon could turn a confident, experienced sailor into a drifting, worried man within minutes. Fog, cloud cover, or even airborne dust could ruin a voyage. Navigation became guesswork, and guesswork at sea was gambling with your fate. The fishermen don't panic, but they do shift. Everything becomes more deliberate. Hands tighten on ropes. Eyes peer into the darkness. The boat slows, not because anyone says so, but because that's what centuries of instinct demand. The quirky tidbit arrives right on cue. Many medieval fishermen believed clouds that swallowed the moon were sky creatures trying to steal her light. Some said the clouds were jealous spirits. Others believed clouds were the breath of giants sleeping far above the world. At least one fisherman aboard your boat insists clouds dislike moonlit seas because they envy how pretty it looks. It's so absurd you almost smile. Almost. Because without the moon, the sea really does feel different. Bigger, heavier, less readable. The fishermen lean into their backup methods. They start testing the water with weighted rope, dropping a lead-tipped line into the dark to feel for depth changes. They murmur to each other, comparing the tension in the rope with what they know by heart. Historians still argue whether medieval fishermen had an organised system of depth checking or simply improvised based on experience. Some say fishermen used regularly knotted ropes to measure depth like proto-sonar. Others suggest they relied more on intuition, where the water felt shallow, where the waves shifted, where fish disappeared. Tonight it's clear they used everything: memory, touch, sound, instinct, and whatever sliver of moonlight they had before it vanished. The boat drifts, the darkness deepens, and the men listen, not to bells, not to gulls, not to cliffs, but to the water itself. One fisherman tilts his head and whispers, "Hear how she hits the hull?" You don't. It sounds like water, gentle water, but he insists the rhythm has changed. Faster means the tide's turning. She'll pull us off course if we let her. Another fisherman wets a finger, holds it up, and tries to detect wind, because clouds often bring shifting breezes. The wind changes direction slightly and the men nod grimly. "We'd be heading the wrong way already if we trusted the drift," one mutters. You're suddenly grateful you're not alone. Without them, you would have turned into a medieval missing person story within minutes. A soft joke rises to relieve the tension. Whenever the moon hides, she tests us, like a mother checking if her children did their chores. Another fisherman responds, "Then we've definitely failed." A third adds, "Speak for yourself, I did my chores." Even the sea seems to offer a sympathetic splash. For a few minutes, nothing changes. The world is just a boat and a void, and the memory of silver light. But slowly the fishermen begin stitching their mental maps together. The tide is pulling northwest. The wind is shifting eastward. The depth feels consistent, deep, but not bottomless. No new sounds echo from land. The previous moonlit position told them where they were. And clouds rarely last all night. They lean on these clues the way you lean on your phone when the battery hits 5%. The cloud layer thickens for a moment, making the night impossibly dark. The fishermen pause. Even the boat seems to hold its breath. Then, like a curtain being pulled aside, a thin edge of moonlight slips out. Just a sliver. Just enough. The fishermen straighten immediately. One points. There. Look how the water brightens. You see it. The faintest shimmer returning. Like the sea remembering how to shine. The moon emerges little by little, glowing through the thinning clouds. The boat returns to life. They adjust the tiller. They reposition the nets. Their shoulders relax just slightly. One fisherman taps you on the arm and says, "Moon never leaves us long, just likes to see if we're paying attention." You smile, relieved. But another fisherman leans closer and whispers, "Still, never trust clouds. They're up to something." Historians absolutely never mention cloud conspiracies, but you let the moment slide. The moon finally breaks free, brilliant again, reclaiming its throne. The silver path returns. The danger recedes, and the sea becomes readable once more. You exhale, letting the moonlight steady your thoughts. It's in this moment you understand something important. Backup methods existed. Sound, depth, wind, instinct. But without the moon, medieval fishermen were half blind. The moon wasn't optional. It was everything. And tonight, you feel that truth in your bones. The moon reclaims the night as if nothing happened. Bright, steady, and completely unapologetic for ducking behind clouds and nearly giving everyone heart palpitations. The fishermen, now visibly calmer, fall back into their natural rhythm. But the mood has changed. There's a renewed attentiveness in their eyes, as if the brief lunar betrayal reminded them just how unforgiving the sea can be. You lean over the side, peering into the returning silver glow on the waves. The water looks peaceful now, but the fishermen aren't studying the surface for beauty. They're studying it for information. And suddenly one of them taps the rail beside you. "Watch the shadows," he murmurs. You blink. "Shadows?" He points to where the moonlight bends over a passing swell. The light doesn't just sit on the water, it stretches, breaks, pools, and sometimes vanishes entirely. What you see is simple flickering. The fishermen treat like coded messages. A mainstream historical fact anchors itself in your mind. Medieval fishermen used moon shadows on the water to judge depth. Just as cliffs cast shadows during the day, underwater features, ridges, shelves, sudden rises, alter how moonlight reflects on the surface. A wider, softer shadow might signal deeper water. A sharper, quicker flicker could mean rocks lurking just beneath. Tonight, the shadows change shape every few seconds, drifting with the waves. One fisherman crouches beside you and points to a small dark patch where the silver breaks. "Shallow rise," he says. "Seafloor's lifting there. Just a little, but enough to shift the nets." Another fisherman taps a slightly larger shadow and adds, "That one's deeper than it looks. Don't trust it. The moon lies when it's this high." You raise an eyebrow. "The moon lies?" He shrugs. "Only when she's proud." A quirky tidbit emerges easily. Some medieval fishermen believed the moon cast trick shadows when it was too full or too bright. Shadows meant to test a sailor's humility. If you trusted a trick shadow blindly, you might run aground. If you questioned it, the sea respected you. Whether or not any of that is true, it makes you view the water with a healthy suspicion. The fishermen shift positions again. One adjusts the angle of the boat so that the moonlight hits the waves more cleanly. You suddenly see what they see. Long, dark streaks that glide beneath the surface like moving ribbons. "Those," a fisherman explains, "are the deep channels. Follow them too long, and you drift far from shore." Historians still argue whether these shadow-reading techniques were systematic or instinctive, whether fishermen genuinely recognized consistent patterns, or simply inherited a habit of staring at the water until meaning appeared. Some scholars claim this was a refined skill passed through generations with surprising accuracy. Others insist fishermen just felt it, blending superstition and observation so seamlessly that the truth is impossible to untangle. Watching these men tonight, you suspect both interpretations are right. One fisherman kneels, holding a rope coil loosely in his hands, and stares at the water with a concentration you normally see on people solving math puzzles. He leans close and whispers, "See the ripple cross that shadow?" You do, just barely. Means something big passed under it. Another fish, you ask? He shakes his head. Rock, or sand ridge, or a stubborn seal. Or a ghost, another fisherman adds far too casually. Everyone nods solemnly. You decide not to pursue that one. The boat drifts slowly over a patch of water where the shadows seem to grow sharper. You feel the shift, a subtle change in the rhythm of the waves. It's the kind of thing you would have missed an hour ago, but now it tickles your awareness. The fishermen sense it too. The tiller is adjusted. The angle shifts. The boat glides away from whatever danger the moon just revealed. A joke slips out naturally. Careful, one fisherman murmurs. Step in the wrong moon shadow and you'll make the sea jealous. Another adds, she hates when you step on her toes. A third mutters, or when you fall in and scream like a goat. The men snicker softly, but their eyes stay fixed on the water. You follow their gaze as one particularly long shadow passes under the boat. The moonlight stretches far to the right, shimmering brightly, except where a jagged dark patch interrupts it. The fisherman nearest you whispers, underwater ridge, long one. Been moving east for years. Ridges move? He nods. Storms shift them. Then he leans closer, voice dropping. Unless the giants move them when no one's looking. You stare at him, unsure whether he's joking. He grins. He's joking, probably. The shadows change again as the tide turns. You begin to sense a kind of language in the way the water plays with the moonlight. Not words, but signals, cues, whispers. You're not fluent yet, but you understand why maps felt inadequate. What good is a static drawing when the sea is alive, reshaping itself with every lunar pull? The fishermen adjust course slightly, following the darker bands of deeper water. They avoid the glinting peaks that reveal shallow rises. Their movements are small but precise. Tiny corrections that keep you safe in a world where a single misread shadow could be disastrous. You inhale the cool night air, tasting salt and stillness. The moon seems closer now, its light crisper, its shadows clearer. You hear the soft slap of water against the hull, the whisper of nets drying, the creak of rope on wood, and for the first time, you begin to appreciate the artistry of it all. This isn't superstition. This isn't guesswork. This is skill. An ancient, intimate skill, the kind that lives in muscles and memory rather than parchment and ink. The boat glides on, guided by silver light and shifting shadows. The men stay focused, but their shoulders relax. The dangers have passed for now. The moon has spoken, and you read its message just a little, alongside them. The night deepens into that quiet, velvety darkness that only the open sea can make. Soft, endless, and surprisingly gentle now that the moon's glow has returned to full strength. The fishermen move about with easier shoulders, no longer tense from cloud-borne uncertainty. The nets lie in small shimmering piles, the catches glinting like spilled treasure. And as the boat eases into a slow drift, the conversation around you turns towards something more domestic, more grounded, more human than shadows and moon halos. Nets. Not just any nets. Moon-blessed nets. The way the fishermen talk about them, you would think these are magical artifacts stolen from a wizard's attic. But as you listen, you realize this belief wasn't fringe at all. Entire medieval villages swore by the idea that certain nets worked better under certain moons, and some were considered completely useless unless paired with one specific lunar phase. You settle in as they begin sorting through the nets, checking knots, mending small tears with quick calloused fingers. One fisherman pats a net affectionately, as if greeting an old friend. "This one likes the waxing moon," he murmurs. "Sulked all last week." Another fisherman snorts. "Your nets don't sulk. You sulk when they don't work," the boat chuckles. A mainstream historical fact rises quietly in your mind. Medieval fishing nets varied widely in design. Drag nets, seine nets, drift nets, and each type behaved differently depending on tide, current, and moonlight. Fishermen learned through experience which nets performed well in bright water and which worked better in darkness. If a net consistently caught more fish under certain moon phases, people took note. Over the generations, practical patterns slowly grew into myths. A fisherman lifts one net with a grin. "This one's a waxing moon net," he says confidently. "Works best when the moon is growing fat. Won't catch a thing on a waning night." Another fisherman shakes his head. "That's not because of the moon. That's because you tied it badly." This gets another round of laughter. But then someone, One of the older fishermen with the serious face leans closer and says, "My grandmother told me some nets hold moonlight." You blink. "Hold moonlight?" He nods. "They soak in the glow if you leave them out on a full moon night. Makes them stronger, luckier." A quirky tidbit, yes, but delivered with such sincerity that you can't help but imagine fishermen laying their nets on the sand like blankets, sunbathing at midnight, waiting for the moon to generously charge them like some celestial battery. Another fisherman adds, "Some people won't even touch a net during the dark moon, says it scares the luck out of it." A third responds, "Everything scares the luck out of your nets. Birds, ghosts, cold air, hot air." "Well," the first fisherman replies defensively, "luck is sensitive." The boat erupts in soft laughter again. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were true superstitions or simply metaphors for practical knowledge. Maybe moon-blessed nets were just better tied nets. Maybe bad luck nets were ones with worn knots or mismatched weights. Or perhaps families intentionally used different nets on different nights to test which patterns worked best. Over time, cause and effect blurred into folklore. One fisherman demonstrates something that looks suspiciously like a ritual. He gently smooths his hand along the net, muttering, "Stay calm now, don't tangle," as if speaking to an unruly child. You think he's joking until the other fishermen nod approvingly. Apparently nets respond well to compliments. Nobody tells you why. Nobody even questions it. A fisherman at the bow gestures toward a particularly worn net. "That one's older than me," he says proudly. "Caught more fish on full moons than any net in the village." Another fisherman adds, "Probably because it scares the fish with how ugly it is." The men chuckle again, but the pride remains. You watch the moonlight spill over the nets, turning their ropes into glimmering shapes. You can see why villagers believed they absorbed the moon's glow. The light clings to them, weaving between the knots like silver thread. It looks magical, even if you know it's only light on wet rope. The fishermen talk about their family's beliefs. One says his mother always blessed nets by holding them up to the moon and whispering a prayer. Another said his father refused to use a net that had been stepped over by a cat during a waxing moon. Apparently cats disrupt lunar alignment. Another fisherman claims his aunt read nets the way others read tea leaves, determining whether a fishing day would be good or cursed based on how the ropes twisted in the light. You ask, "Did she ever get it wrong?" He nods. "Once. She blamed the moon." The others nod in agreement. Blaming the moon seems widely acceptable. As the nets dry, the fishermen begin fastening weights, checking knots, and coiling ropes. Their movements are slow, patient, ritualistic. You start to understand the emotional attachment. These nets represent survival, years of experience, hope, frustration, triumph. If people projected personality or lunar preference onto them, who could blame them? It made a hard life feel a little more manageable. One fisherman gently lifts a net and says, "This one's worked with me since I was a boy." His voice softens. "It always listens to the moon." You don't know what that means, but you feel it. The boat rocks quietly. The moon glows steady. The nets drying in the night air seem to hum with possibility. And you sit among these men, these storytellers, navigators, moon readers, as they prepare their tools for whatever the night still has in store. For now, the nets rest under the moon's watchful eye, and so do you. The nets rest like sleeping animals beside your feet, faintly glimmering in the moon's glow, and the fishermen finish their quiet rituals, checking knots, adjusting weights, brushing fingers along the ropes as if soothing restless spirits. The night feels balanced again, steady and calm. The earlier tension of the cloud-covered moon has faded, and with the catch secured, there's only one task left that matters: finding your way back home. You notice the subtle shift first in the fisherman's stance. Their bodies turn, not sharply, but with an old practiced motion, as if some invisible signal just whispered through the air. They glance at the moon again, then at the softly rippling water, then at each other. You sense it instantly. You're heading back. Not by map, not by compass, but by moon. A mainstream historical fact drifts gently into your mind. Medieval fishermen used the moon's position in the sky to navigate homeward, especially before dawn. A descending moon pointed toward certain coastlines, its angle hinting at distance and direction. They knew their routes based on how the silver orbs sank along familiar cliffs. The moon wasn't just a guide for going out. It was the beacon that led them home. One fisherman taps your shoulder lightly. "Watch the moons fall," he says. "She's leaning toward these cliffs. That's our way." You look. The moon hangs lower now, not directly overhead, but drifting toward the horizon in a slow, graceful descent. Its reflection forms a long, trembling line on the water, pointing in its own shimmering language toward land. The quirky tidbit arrives right on time. Some fishermen believed the moon physically pulled their boats toward shore as it sank. Others claimed the moon was a shepherd guiding her flock safely back to land. A few insisted that if you stared at the moon's reflection long enough, it would show your house somewhere within the glimmering streak. One fisherman swears he once saw the roof of his cottage in a ripple. The others tell him he definitely saw a wave. He sticks to his story. The helmsman takes his place at the stern and adjusts the tiller in tiny, precise motions. The boat responds instantly, turning to follow the moonlit path. You feel the shift beneath your feet, gentle, sure, like stepping back onto a road you've walked 1,000 times. Historians still argue whether this moon-based navigation was intentional science or inherited superstition. Some scholars believe experienced fishermen understood celestial movement well enough to calculate direction instinctively. Others argue they felt their way home, following rhythms of tide, water temperature, wind and moon position all at once. Watching these men tonight, you suspect the truth sits somewhere between logic and muscle, memory. The boat glides over smooth water. The moon's reflection plays along the surface, long and shimmering, broken only by the occasional wave crest. The men stay quiet now, not solemn, just focused. This is the part of the night where careful attention matters. You're not lost, but you could be if the moon slips into clouds again. One fisherman breaks the silence with a gentle joke. "Follow the moon home and she'll treat you kindly. Follow your gut home and you'll end up in someone else's kitchen." Another adds, "Happened to my cousin. Ate half a stranger's stew before realizing he wasn't home." The boat chuckles softly. As the sea grows calmer, you begin to pick up on more cues the fishermen trust. The smell of air changes slightly. Less salty, more earthy. "Shore breeze," one murmurs. A faint shift in the wind makes the sailcloth quiver. "Right direction," another adds. Even the water beneath the boat feels different now. Less vast, more rhythmic. "We're near the outer shallows," says the helmsman. And yet, the moon remains the center of everything. Its glow creates a long silver ladder stretching toward the unseen coast. Every time the boat tilts, the rungs shimmer, rearranging themselves into a new direction cue. The fishermen follow it like a runway guiding them through the dark. One fisherman points to the moon's lower edge. "See the way she dips? Means we're halfway." You're not entirely convinced this is a standardized measurement, but everyone nods confidently, so you pretend you see it too. The water grows quieter. The night deepens. The air cools. You feel the closeness of land even though the shore remains invisible. The moon continues its descent, inching closer to the horizon like a lantern being slowly lowered. The fishermen don't rush. They guide the boat gently, letting the moon do most of the work. Every now and then, someone listens for distant bells or the rumble of waves against cliffs, confirming direction with sound, just like before. But mostly, they trust the moon. "Maps can't show you this," one fisherman says quietly. "A map can't tell you how the night feels. The moon does." Another fisherman nods. "The moon always takes you home, if you show her respect." The silver path narrows as the moon dips lower. The fishermen straighten. They sense the coastline ahead even before any landmark appears. A faint silhouette rises in the distance, a dark smudge against deeper darkness. "Cliffs," someone murmurs, "right where she said they'd be." And suddenly you see it too, the faint outline of land revealed by the moon's last low glow. You didn't need a map. You didn't need a compass. You needed the moon. The boat glides forward, cutting through the soft silver, guided by instincts older than charts, older than navigation instruments, older than written history. The fishermen smile, gentle and tired. "You see," one says softly, "moon never lets us drift too far." And as you watch the coastline grow clearer, you believe him. The coastline edges closer, or maybe it's more accurate to say the moon gently pushes it into view. But even as the cliffs begin forming shapes in the distance, something shifts again among the fishermen. Not fear, not tension. Something quieter, more contemplative. because the closer you get to land, the more another force begins to weave itself into this moon-guided world. Faith. Not quite the faith you might expect, though. Not church bells ringing at dawn, not hymn-singing monks, not illuminated manuscripts sprinkled with gold. This is a softer, older, more tangled kind of faith. The faith of fishermen who trusted the moon and tides while living under a church that, at times, warned against heathen sky beliefs. You watch as the men begin tidying lines and preparing the boat for landing, but their conversation drifts, like the tide, toward this complicated dance between lunar instincts and Christian doctrine. A mainstream historical fact eases its way into your thoughts. Medieval Europe was overwhelmingly Christian, but folk beliefs, especially maritime ones, never disappeared. They simply blended, sanctified, mutated. Fishermen went to church on Sundays and still swore by moon cycles on Mondays. Priests couldn't erase centuries of sky watching, any more than fishermen could ignore a full moon's shimmering instructions. One fisherman scratches his beard. Father Aelred says the moon's just a light God hung up there, another snorts. A light that pulls the sea and saves our skins. That's more than decoration. A third shrugs. Church folk live on land. They don't know the moon like we do. The men nod and the boat creaks in agreement. Then comes a quirky tidbit that surprises you with how casually it's dropped. Some fishermen believed the Virgin Mary controlled the moon's phases. Not metaphorically, literally. They claimed she dimmed and brightened it depending on how much help the world needed. One fisherman recounts being told as a boy that a waxing moon meant Mary was smiling on the waters, and a waning moon meant she was resting after looking after too many fools. The boat chuckles softly at that. Another fisherman adds, "My mother said St. Brendan whispers to the moon to keep fishermen safe." A third argues, "It's St. Nicholas. Brendan looks after travellers, not nets," another mutters. "Nicholas looks after children and fools. That's all of us." You're starting to see how tangled the spiritual landscape is out here. Christian saints, folk spirits, moon beings, luck charms, and deeply practical seafaring knowledge all blending until no one can tell where one ends and another begins. Historians still argue whether the church genuinely tried to suppress lunar law or merely tolerated it as long as it didn't drift into overt paganism. Some claim church records scolded fishermen for placing the moon above God. Others suggest priests simply gave up trying to argue with men who spent more time with tides than with clergy. And some believe the church eventually incorporated moon symbolism into sermons to bridge the gap, turning lunar cycles into metaphors for divine order, obedience, and renewal. Watching these fishermen tonight, you suspect the truth is somewhere in the middle. They respected the church, but they trusted the moon more. The boat continues towards shore, but the moon remains the authority. Even faith itself seems filtered through lunar logic. A fisherman adjusts the tiller and murmurs a quick prayer. Not to God, not to a saint, but a quiet, "Guide us, bright one." Another fisherman touches a small wooden charm hanging from his belt. It's carved with a crescent shape. "My wife made this," he says. "Says it keeps storms away." Another man raises an eyebrow. "Does it work?" He thinks about it. "Storm killed our neighbour's roof, not ours." "That's proof enough," someone says. A gentle laugh ripples across the deck. Then, as if to remind you that fishermen aren't above humour even in theological debates, someone mutters, "If the church wants us to ignore the moon, they should make Sunday service on a boat." Another adds, "They'd sink before the sermon ends." A third says, "Then we'd finally get shorter sermons." The laughter this time is louder, but still soft enough not to offend the moon. The conversation drifts again, this time toward how different villages balance sky faith and church faith. One fisherman recalls a neighbouring port where the priest banned fishing during a full moon, calling it temptation by unnatural brightness. The fisherman ignored him, returned with the best haul in years, and the priest quietly stopped giving that sermon. Another recounts how, during childhood, he believed the moon was an angel's shield, its glow protecting sailors who respected its phases. If you sailed without honouring the moon, he says, the angel turned the shield away and storms came. He shrugs. Father never corrected me. Maybe he didn't know either. You lean against the rail, listening, feeling the layers of belief weaving together like ropes in a net. Nothing here is purely superstition or purely religion. Everything blends, everything adapts, and as you glance at the moon, steady, brilliant, guiding, you understand why. Maps fail, charts rot, Compasses weren't common yet. Churches sat safely on land. But the moon was always with them, always rising, always setting, always pulling the sea, always shining over the darkest waters, always showing the invisible, always marking time, always marking home. To medieval fishermen, the moon wasn't just a celestial body. It was a partner, a protector, a judge, a friend, a threat, a shepherd, a warning, a blessing, a teacher. No wonder they wrapped it in layers of faith. No wonder the church couldn't replace it, even if it tried. The coastline grows clearer now, the cliffs rising like shadowed giants at the edge of the night. The moon hangs low, almost touching the horizon, bathing the water in its last wide sweep of silver. One fisherman murmurs, "Nearly home, thank her while she watches." Another whispers, "Thank the saints too, just in case." The boat glides towards shore under this hybrid faith, a faith woven of tides, superstition, scripture, and shimmering light. And as the moon continues guiding you forward, you feel the quiet truth settling into your bones. Out here, faith and navigation are the same thing. The cliffs grow taller with every quiet pull of the tide, but the fishermen don't rush. They don't strain toward home or call out excitedly. Instead, something more deliberate happens. They begin preparing, not the boat, not the nets, but themselves. Because returning home isn't just a matter of following the moon's glow. It's about following records, patterns, quiet, hand-scratched knowledge that guides them as faithfully as the moon does. And that's when you see it. A small leather-bound bundle tied shut with a cord, tucked beneath a coil of rope near the bow. At first you think it's a prayer book, or maybe a scrap of navigational map. But the fisherman who owns it carefully slides it onto his lap and opens it. Inside are no printed words, no bright illustrations, just rough marks, small sketches, crude circles, notes so faint they look like memories smudged into parchment, a lunar log, a personal calendar of moon phases, tide notes, fish behaviour, good nights, bad nights, and the quiet mysteries only a fisherman would bother to scribble down. A mainstream historical fact drifts to you like a calm tide. Although literacy rates among medieval fishermen were low, many coastal workers kept simple personal records, tallies, moon phase marks, tide symbols, crude drawings, even weather notes. They weren't journals, they weren't books. They were living, breathing survival guides built over decades. And unlike maps, these logs were reliable because they were based on experience, not guesswork. The fisherman flips a page. You see crude moon shapes, circles, crescents, slivers, each one paired with tiny symbols only he seems to understand. A wave shape for high catch nights, a cross for a dangerous tide, a dot for when the wind betrayed them, a fish-shaped scribble marking migration nights. Some pages look crowded, others nearly blank. This one, he says, tapping a thin crescent, was the night the tide dragged us toward the shoals. Another fisherman leans over. That was the night you dropped your boots in the sea, and saved the boat, didn't it? You saved nothing. The boots saved themselves. Soft laughter ripples across the deck. Then the quirky tidbit surfaces. Some fishermen hid their lunar logs from neighbours, not because the information was secret, but because moon knowledge was considered personal luck. Sharing it could dilute the fortune. One fisherman tells you that his uncle buried his lunar log under a rock near the shoreline every season to recharge it with moon dreams. Another man swears that a rival fisherman once tried to steal someone's log and immediately got lost at sea for 2 days. The group nods as if this is the natural consequence of cosmic plagiarism. Historians still argue whether such logs were common or rare. Some suggest fishermen kept them mostly in their heads, passing details orally. Others believe many logs existed but decayed before historians could find them. Wet parchment rarely survives centuries of salt and wind. A few scholars even theorize that moon logs helped develop localized calendars that differed from official church calendars, especially in fishing towns. As usual, nobody agrees. Typical historians. The boat rocks gently as the fishermen share their own logs, some written, some remembered. One recites from memory the tides of last winter. Another lists which moon phases brought the fattest cod. A third recalls which nights the sea felt wrong. And sure enough, the log keeper flips to a page with crooked markings, like the sea itself wasn't cooperating that night. You notice each fisherman has a different system. One uses symbols, Another uses tally marks. Another uses scratched lines that look like a chicken danced across the page. But they all share the same core principle. The moon teaches you, but only if you write down what she says. The helmsman speaks quietly. Maps change, men lie, wind tricks you, but your own notes never betray you. Another nods. Only write what the moon shows. That's the rule. A third adds, unless you had too much ale, then write nothing. The boat laughs. You ask whether these logs ever contradict each other. 3 fishermen answer at once. Of course. Always. Every month. So how do they know which one to trust? The helmsman shrugs. Trust the moon first, the log second, and your gut third. Another fisherman corrects him. No. Trust your grandmother first, the moon second, the log third, gut is 5th or 6th. Someone else chimes in. Where's luck on this list? Everywhere, comes the reply. You realise something important. These logs aren't scientific documents. They're living companions, memory anchors, quiet confessions of nights gone well or horribly wrong. They're as personal as diaries and as practical as manuals, and every mark on the page is a tiny rebellion against the uncertainty of the sea. The fisherman with the leather-bound log flips to a nearly blank page. This night, he says softly, we'll go here. Another fisherman asks, what symbol will you use? Not sure yet. Put a fish, someone suggests. Put a moon, someone else says. Put a cloud, another jokes. Put all 3, you offer, they laugh. Then it'll look like a child drew it, one says. Maybe that's appropriate, another adds. The log closes with a soft whisper, like a wave folding into itself. The boat continues toward the dark outline of shore, but now you understand that the moon didn't guide you alone tonight. These handwritten notes, these little scraps of moonlit memory, guided the boat just as much. The fishermen trust the moon, but they also trust the marks made in the quiet hours of past nights. And as the moon dips lower, you realize something profound. Navigation wasn't just a skill. It was a conversation between man, sea, memory, and moon. The cliffs are closer now, dark silhouettes rising like sleeping giants beneath the fading moon. But the fishermen don't relax. Not yet. Not when the most unpredictable part of the night still waits beyond the horizon of silver light. Because even with all their skill, all their logs, and all their moon-reading instincts, there is one thing every medieval fisherman feared more than storms, more than shoals, more than gossip-possessed nets. Moonless nights. Nights when the moon disappears entirely, swallowed by its own cycle. Nights when the sea becomes a featureless void. Nights when direction, depth, danger, and distance become invisible. You're lucky tonight. Your moon is still lowering gently toward the cliffs. But as the fishermen prepare for the final stretch home, their conversation turns toward those nights. The dreaded new moon voyages. The nights where no shimmering path guides you, no shadows reveal reefs, no tides gleam with silver clues, just a black ocean swallowing the world. A mainstream historical fact surfaces like a slow tide. New moon periods were notoriously dangerous for medieval fishermen. Many refused to fish during them. Others limited their travel strictly to daylight hours, and those who did venture out at night relied heavily on sound, luck, and sheer familiarity with the water. Some villages even banned night fishing during the dark moon entirely. One fisherman tightens a knot and mutters, "Dark nights ruin even the best men." Another adds, "Sea's got no mercy when she has no witness." A third replies, "Moon gone, hope gone, simple as that." You swallow. The way they say it, you believe them. The helmsman taps the edge of the boat with his knuckle. "Last month's dark moon," he says. 3 boats lost their way in fog, came back at dawn from the wrong direction. "Wrong direction," you ask. He nods. "Ended up near Black Point Bay, nasty waters, rocks under everything." "Did they survive?" A fisherman shrugs. 2 did. The third, well, sea kept it. A quiet settles over the deck. The moon glows low, as if listening. Then comes the quirky tidbit, so peculiar you almost doubt it's real. Some fishing communities believe that during moonless nights the sea opened its second mouth. Not a literal mouth, though one fisherman insists he saw something once, but a spiritual mouth, a hunger. They said the dark ocean swallowed sound, swallowed direction, swallowed courage. That's why some fishermen refused to go out on those nights, unless someone recited a blessing. Lit a lantern blessed by church water, or tied a piece of iron to the mast to bite the darkness before it bit them. You consider asking what exactly the sea is supposedly biting, but decide your imagination is dangerous enough already. Another fisherman adds, "My grandmother said the sea listens harder when the moon sleeps, so don't speak unless you have to." Another nods, "And never whistle. Dark moon hates whistling." A third mutters, "My cousin whistled once on a new moon. Boat spun in a circle." "The tide did that," someone corrects. "He still shouldn't have whistled," the first insists. Historians still argue whether these moonless night fears were practical or purely superstition. Some scholars believe fishermen simply recognized how dangerous it was to navigate without light and crafted myths to warn against it. Others argue that psychological fear, being surrounded by black water with no visual reference, made the sea feel alive and hostile. A few historians suggest the church encouraged avoiding dark moon fishing by associating it with spiritual danger, though the evidence is fuzzy at best. The fishermen continue their quiet recollections. One describes a dark moon night so pitch black he couldn't see the hand in front of his face. "All I had was the sound of my own breathing," he says, "and the sea felt like it was staring at me." Another fisherman recounts how his father once returned home shaken, claiming he heard voices in the waves during a moonless voyage. He adds quickly, "Probably just wind, or spirits. Never know." Someone else chimes in with a joke, because tension, even in medieval boats, needs release. Dark moon nights are when the sea tests which fishermen have the best excuses for turning back. Another fisherman snorts, "I always have good excuses." "Your best excuse is your face," someone adds. The men chuckle softly, but beneath the humour is a clear truth. Moonless nights were terrifying, and even though you're safe tonight under a slowly sinking moon, you can feel the weight of their memories in the air. The fear lingers in their voices, in the way they glance at the horizon, in the way their hands unconsciously tighten ropes when speaking of those black water nights. One fisherman points at the moon. "Imagine she wasn't there," he says quietly. "You try. You imagine the sea without silver, without shadows, without shape, without a path. Just dark water swallowing the world. Your stomach drops. 'No thank you,' you whisper." The fishermen nod in unified agreement. The helmsman explains more of the practical dangers. Without moonlight, waves become invisible until they hit you. Reefs blend seamlessly with deep water. Tides become unreadable. Clouds and cliffs look identical. The horizon disappears. Distance becomes impossible to judge. Boat wakes vanish instantly. Your own reflection disappears. Fishermen hated that one most of all. "You can't tell where sky ends and sea begins," he says. "Feels like falling, even when you're standing still." Another fisherman adds, "And then there's the silence, too big, too empty." A third mutters, "Sea likes to whisper on dark nights." Someone else says, "That's just you being scared." "Maybe," the first replies, still whispered. The moon dips lower, almost touching the edge of the cliffs ahead. Its light stretches long across the sea, shimmering like the final strokes of a brush. You feel a strange gratitude for it. The fishermen do too, because tonight the moon has stayed awake with you. Tonight the sea has boundaries you can see. Tonight danger is visible, but they never forget, and now you won't either, that moonless nights were the ocean's most dangerous moods, a world without pathways, without guides, without hope. The helmsman whispers almost to himself, "Always respect the dark moon. She sharpens the sea." The others nod, and beneath the silver glow you nod too. The cliffs loom larger now, black against the thinning night, but the fishermen still move with that same measured patience, as if crossing the final stretch requires even more care than the open sea. The moon continues its slow descent, brushing the horizon with a soft silver edge, and the boat rocks gently beneath you like it knows the way home by heart. But tonight's journey isn't just about nets and shadows and moon paths. It's also about something deeper, something that ties these men together across generations, something soft-spoken, quiet, and carried more in muscle memory than in words. Moon wisdom, not learned from books, not taught in schools, but inherited, whispered, lived. As the boat drifts toward the coastline, one fisherman pulls a small wooden charm from his belt and rolls it between his fingers. Another adjusts the tiller using the exact same gesture you saw earlier in the night. A third checks the rope knots with a rhythm that looks ritualistic, passed down through thousands of similar hands. A mainstream historical fact flickers into your mind. Medieval fishing knowledge was nearly 100% oral and experiential. Fathers taught sons, uncles taught nephews, neighbours taught each other. Records were rare, maps were rarer, but moon wisdom, how to read tides, shadows, reflections, fish movement, was as steady as breathing, a skill built through generations. Tonight you witness that living lineage. The fishermen start talking, not about fish, not about danger, but about their first nights at sea. "My father woke me before dawn," one says softly. "Told me to follow the moon's tail," another nods. "My grandfather taught me how moon shadows bend on shallow water." A third murmurs, "My mother said never look at the moon too long, or she'll start telling you secrets you can't handle." The boat chuckles at that one. Then comes the quirky tidbit. In some villages, fishermen believed each family had its own relationship with the moon. Some families claimed the moon spoke more clearly to them, giving brighter reflections, stronger currents, more reliable shadows. Rivalries even formed over which families had the most moon-blessed instincts. Fish wars, but lunar. One fisherman beside you says, "My uncle swore our family could feel tides in our knees." Another scoffs, "Your uncle blamed his knees for everything." "He was right about the tides, though," the first insists. A third adds, "He was wrong about rain. Said his knee pinched when clouds were angry. That knee lied more than a merchant." Soft laughter fills the space. Historians still argue whether this generational moon wisdom was consistent or wildly varied between families and regions. Some scholars suggest certain lineages specialized in certain moon phases, like waxing moon families who fished at dawn or waning moon families who fished at dusk. Others argue these distinctions were just village gossip, exaggerated over ale. The truth, as usual, is somewhere in between. You feel the weight of that inheritance as the men point toward the coastline. "See the way the moon dips behind the left cliff?" one asks. "That's how my father taught me to tell we're near shallow rocks," another fisherman adds. "My grandfather said the moon paints warnings if she likes you." Someone else mutters, "She likes us enough to keep us alive." You try to read the moon the way they do. You stare at the shadows on the cliffs, the reflection on the sea, the delicate way the glow bends at the edges. You squint, tilt your head, and pretend you understand. A fisherman notices your struggle. With a grin, he says, "Takes years before your eyes wake up." Another nods. "Moon's language isn't learned, it's absorbed." Then someone adds, "Some men spend their whole lives fishing and never learn a thing," followed by, "Look at him." And they all gesture jokingly to the helmsman. He rolls his eyes. "I can hear you, and I do know how to read the moon." "No, you don't." "I do. Your moon reading is so bad the sea nearly returned you to your mother." The boat laughs, and even the helmsman smirks, but beneath the teasing is real affection, a living thread of shared knowledge, experience, and trust. These men don't just know the sea, they know each other. Their families fished together for centuries. Their ancestors navigated these exact waters by moonlight long before maps or compasses existed. A fisherman taps his temple. "My father said the moon builds a home in a fisherman's mind. Once she's in there, she never leaves." Another murmurs, "Mine said the moon teaches slowly, patiently. She doesn't hurry fools." A third says quietly, "My mother told me the moon remembers every boat she guides home." You feel that truth in your bones, because tonight, in this moment, under this fading glow, you are part of that chain too. You've watched the moon guide you, warn you, test you, comfort you. You've learned, just a little, how fishermen saw the sea before technology replaced instinct. The coastline becomes clearer now. You spot the faint outline of the village's outer huts, the soft torchlight flickering near the docks. The fishermen straighten, preparing for landing. But before they turn fully toward shore, the eldest fisherman speaks quietly, almost reverently. "Remember this night. Moon lessons are simple. She guides, she warns, she illuminates, she disappears, she returns, and so do we." The others nod, and as the moon dips behind the cliffs, letting the sea deepen into shadow, you understand. This is generational wisdom, not written, not taught, but lived. Passed down in whispers, carried in instincts, shared across nights like this, and now carried by you too. The cliffs rise now like dark, ancient guardians flanking the entryway to the world you left hours ago. The moon, your silent silver captain all, night, hangs low against the horizon, barely skimming the edge of the sea. Its light stretches thin and trembling, like the last glow of a lantern that refuses to go out before you reach safety. The fishermen make the final adjustments with the kind of composed confidence you've seen all night. But there's something different in their expressions now. A softness, a quiet satisfaction, a private smile that says, "We've made it. Again." You exhale slowly. You didn't realize you'd been holding your breath. The boat glides over water that's turning darker with every passing moment. The moon is losing its hold, its path across the sea shrinking as dawn prepares its own slow entrance. The fishermen know this transition intimately. It's the nightly handover, moon to sun, darkness to light, instinct to visibility. But before the night fully yields, you understand the final truth these fishermen have been teaching you without ever naming it. The moon always wins, not because it's mystical, not because it's romantic, but because, in a world without maps, it's the only thing you can trust. A mainstream historical fact floats gently into place. Early medieval maps were notoriously inaccurate, crude, distorted, often based on hearsay or copied by scribes who had never seen the places they drew. Fishermen, on the other hand, trusted what they could observe. The moon, the tides, the reflections, the shadows. These were the tools that never lied, never faded, never tore in the rain. Tonight, you saw the truth of that with your own eyes. The quirky tidbit arrives on its own. Some medieval fishermen believed maps were land-born lies, ink pretending to understand water. They nicknamed them dead paper, because unlike the sea, a map doesn't move or react or forgive mistakes. One fisherman once told his grandson, "Trusting a map at sea is like trusting a rooster to pray for you." No one knows exactly what that means, but everyone agrees it sounds deeply unwise. Historians still argue whether fishermen rejected maps out of practicality or pride. Some say it was simple economics. Why use something expensive, unreliable, and rare when the moon gave you free, perfect updates every night? Others believe it was cultural, a tradition of lunar navigation that stretched back farther than documented history. And some scholars argue early maps were so bad that fishermen dismissed them after one look and never tried again. As you drift toward the docks, you realize scholars have missed something bigger. It wasn't just about inaccuracy. Maps were rigid. The moon was alive. Maps were static. The sea changed daily. Maps showed land. The moon showed the water. The fishermen begin calling out low instructions. Mind the rocks. Ease the sail. Steady now. Their voices blend with the gentle splash of oars dipping into silvered water. The moon's glow weakens, but it still outlines the edges of the wooden dock ahead, like a final blessing before bowing out. "That's it," one fisherman murmurs. "She's brought us home." You feel the boat brush against the dock, a soft thud, a scrape of wood, a clink of rope against mooring posts. The fishermen tie the knots effortlessly, hands moving the way generations before them moved. One of them turns to you. "You understand now why we trust the moon more than maps?" You nod. "Good. Maps are for kings and scholars. Moon is for us." Another fisherman adds, "The moon shows the truth, even when it hurts." A third grins, "Especially when it hurts." You stand on unsteady legs, feeling the wood of the dock beneath your feet after so long floating on the silver sea. The fishermen gather their nets, their catches, and their humble tools. Nothing fancy, nothing decorative, nothing written in gold leaf or drawn on fine vellum. Just rope, wood, fish, and memory. They step onto land as calmly as they pushed off from it hours before. For them, this is routine. For you, it feels like emerging from some ancient dream. One fisherman turns back to look at the moon, now barely a sliver above the horizon. "She'll be up again tomorrow," he says, almost affectionately. "Different shape, same wisdom." Another adds, "And the maps in the Lord's house will still be wrong." The group laughs softly together. As they walk toward the dim glow of the village torches, you linger for just a moment on the quiet dock. The night's lessons drift through your mind. The moonlit paths, the glowing tides, the silver clues, the dangers only light can reveal. The shadows that show depth, the whispers of harbour lore, the rising fish, the cloud-trapped fear, the generational wisdom, the survival written in instincts, not ink, and above all, The moon always knew more about the water than the maps ever could. You breathe in the last of the night, salt, rope, cold wind, warm memory. As dawn creeps forward, the moon finally slips below the horizon, its work done. You whisper a quiet thanks and follow the fisherman home. The night softens as you step away from the docks, leaving behind the rocking boats, the drying nets, and the pale shimmer of the moon's final glow. The village lights flicker gently, warm and distant, like tired eyes waiting for their fisherman to return. Everything feels slower now, quieter, as if the world itself is exhaling after a long, steady breath. The path beneath your feet is familiar, even if you've never walked it before. Each footstep feels softer than the last, cushioned by the gentle hush of dawn beginning somewhere far beyond the hills. The sea behind you murmurs in a low rhythmic whisper, steady, calm, unthreatening now that the night has given way. You let your thoughts drift, unhurried, like small boats on a still tide. The silver glow of the moon lingers in your mind, a comforting afterimage. The gentle rocking of the boat seems to echo through your body, slow and soothing. The fisherman's quiet voices fade into the background like a lullaby carried on the wind. The world feels wrapped in a soft blanket of stillness. The air cools, the sky lightens, your breath deepens, and with each passing moment, the edges of the night soften until everything feels blurred and drowsy, like a candle melting into its own warmth. The sea settles, the cliffs rest. Even the moon, now tucked below the horizon, feels like it has curled up to sleep. You follow its example, your shoulders loosen, your eyes grow heavy, your thoughts dissolve into gentle quiet. The journey is complete. You are safe. You are home.